All right. You would think that one of the reasons I have the most respect for Dr. Bland is because of everything he's taught us over the last several decades. In fact, it's because of two things. One, he gives such amazing introductions. Two, he's a Seahawks fan like myself, so you can't go wrong with being a Seahawks fan. Today, in the next, Nikki asked me to cut it down a little bit, 40 minutes, the gut-immune interface and neuroimmune disorders. I was talking with Dr. Sheetreat yesterday, and she said about her lecture, which will be in a few hours, she said, you know, my lecture is going to be a little disruptive, it's going to be a little interesting. I said, well, mine has dinosaurs, so let's go. These are my disclosures. Last year, I had the privilege to lecture at a functional medicine conference in Ireland with Dr. Michael Stone, and on the way back, I was flying Dublin to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Portland, and it was their morning, so I couldn't sleep, I was super tired, and I thought, fine, I will watch a stupid airplane movie. And I watched Jurassic Park 3. Now, the third movie in any trilogy is always really, really bad. This is no different. And if you love Jurassic Park, I won't give it away for you, but the essence is that the dinosaurs have moved off the island and they are now in the world, in the continents, working, living, reproducing, trying to get along with the people and vice versa. And you can imagine how that was going, hence the reason they have the third movie. I get home from the airplane, I have a hair appointment, I'm talking to my hairdresser and she says, I just moved into a new house, I have this squirrel in my attic, but I love animals. I don't want to get rid of it. I don't know what to do. What is it doing? It's causing chaos, right? She's trying to live with it, she's trying to be nice to it, she's trying to encourage it, and it is going through her electric cords, it is tearing up her insulation, and it has moved its whole squirrel family into the attic. So that's not working either. So now you're thinking to yourself, why in the world is Carrie talking about dinosaurs and squirrels as we talk about the gut and the brain? So what could these possibly have in common? Last year, I had the privilege of being the MC and coordinator and host for an amazing 6-week boot camp with these three illustrious individuals. And in it, we were discussing the exposome and testing and autoimmune disease. And it was a lot of information. Dr. Elroy did hours of video presentation. We had live classes that all the practitioners would come and ask all these questions. And in one particular event, we were talking about all these symptoms. Your patient comes in, they have this symptom, this autoimmune, that autoimmune, chronic disease. They got their tests back, everything's positive. I don't know what to do. Where do I start? And Dr. Aristo said, you start at the barriers. That's where you start. You always start at the barriers. And that's how I tied together dinosaurs and the barriers, which we're going to talk about today, are barriers. If a velociraptor came into the room right now, a couple of things. Most of us would run, and keep in mind, I am aware I do not have to be the fastest runner in the world. I just have to be faster than all y'all. Let's avoid the velociraptor. Some of you I know, and you would try to take down the one velociraptor. If it's just one, you could probably take it. Some of us would call the police, or the zoo, or Joint Base Lewis McChord. I don't know who you call if a dinosaur comes, but like we'd call somebody to come get the dinosaur. No matter what though, it'd be chaos. It'd be total chaos. Now, macrocosm and microcosm. Let's pretend this hotel is the cell, and the outdoor doors are the in and out of the cell wall, and we in here are the mitochondria. So we're humming along, we're doing our Krebs cycle, we're making ATP, we've got calcium balance, no problem. We're the first stop for all steroid production, steroid hormone production, it happens in the mitochondria. We're doing great. And then a velociraptor walks into the room. Everything is going to stop. We have to focus all our resources, everything we're doing, towards getting rid of, dealing with, running from this velociraptor. And this is, in essence, the cell danger response, right? People are coming to us and they're tired and they don't feel well and they have brain fatigue and they hurt and they have chronic disease and autoimmune and cancer. And they're like, what is the one supplement to rule them all? Right? Like, what's the one thing? Just give me the one thing. And I'm like, unfortunately, your body has velociraptors, is overtaken by velociraptors. And the cell and your organelles, like the mitochondria that are supposed to do their job, there's been a barrier breach. There's been a barrier breach, and you're not able to do the things you need to do. So we need to first strengthen the barriers. As Dr. Aristo said, we don't want more velociraptors getting into our body. And then we have to deal with the velociraptors before the cell can go back to doing its job. And that's a hard thing for our patients to hear. They want the one pill, the one hormone, the one peptide to rule them all. That's it. They're like, I don't want a velociraptor. What? No, just give me the thing. So this is where this talk is going to go into these velociraptors, specifically around our barriers. I was talking to Dr. Casey Means a couple weeks ago. Dr. Means is the chief medical officer and co-founder of Levels. She was an ENT surgeon in Portland, and she became a functional medicine doctor. And she was talking about cellular metabolism. So not metabolism like consumers think about with weight loss, but actual cellular metabolism. And she said, you know, I think a lot of our patients have a low cellular metabolism issue. They have a fatigue issue. They have a lack of battery issue. They're tired. They can't fight. They can't produce. They can't create. They can't move from one point of the enzyme to the next point. It doesn't work. They're having all these issues. So what happens is the mitochondria gets disrupted, the Krebs cycle gets disrupted, the electron transport chain gets disrupted. And when they get disrupted, much like we would call, I guess the zoo, if the velociraptor comes, like we would call somebody, the mitochondria call the immune system in. Like, hey, something's disrupting me, fix it, get rid of it, kill it, identify it, do something with it. So the immune system comes in. But the problem is, as Dr. Means said, the immune system cannot take that glass of wine out of our hand. And it cannot take the cookies out of our hand. And it cannot move us into better air quality if we're in bad air quality. And it can't fix the mold if we don't know about it. And it can't keep us off our phone at night or our computers with that bright light affecting our melatonin that we learned from Deanna yesterday. So our immune system is constantly getting told to respond, and it's like, to what? To what? Obviously, there are things on the inside it can, viruses, bacteria, damps, PAMPs, etc. But if we keep perpetuating, and our people keep perpetuating with the velociraptors on the outside, so that we have to start with those external barriers first. Then we get into the actual barriers, the skin, sinuses, GI, blood-brain barrier, the cell wall, as we talked about, all the way into the mitochondria. But we're going to focus today on the gut immune aspect of the neuroimmune, because there's been a lot of conversation around neuroimmune from different angles. We're going from the gut. So I did a quick search on regular Google, not even like Google Scholar. I didn't even PubMed. I just typed in a regular Google gut immune, and what came up? And what came up was not Dr. Bland, and it was not some of the esteemed other colleagues that we know, but I do see UCLA Health. If you want to boost immunity, look to the gut. Harvard Medical, diet, gut microbes, and immunity. Memorial Sloan Kettering, your gut, how to improve it, its effects on the immune system. Nature Journal, interaction between microbiota and immunity and health. So it is absolutely hitting mainstream. You know, it's moved from PubMed, Google Scholar, into just regular Google. And I didn't even have ChatGPT turned on. Like, this was just a regular old search, and this is what's coming up for people. And we're seeing it more and more in our literature, of course. Our patients are seeing it. They're seeing articles on gut bacterial profiles and Parkinson's disease, a systemic review. The relationship between gut microbiome, immune system, brain axis, and major depressive disorder. I feel like this was pun intended, sort of, no-brainer for a lot of us for a lot of years. We would have patients come in with all sorts of GI stuff and depression and anxiety and whatever mood issue. And as you worked on their gut, what got better? Their mood got better. As an aside, oh my gosh, I'm not as depressed anymore. I don't have as much anxiety as I had anymore. Like, we knew about this long before it became mainstream. And I say this because sometimes you're in rooms like this, learning, and you're like, I don't know. No one's really talking about that yet. It's because they're behind the times. 10 or 15 years. You'll see it in 10 or 15 years and be like, I was there in 2023. I saw it. I knew it. So trust, literally, pun intended, trust your gut when it comes to this and your patients. Dr. Bredeson's going to talk beyond the brain, the gut microbiome, and Alzheimer's disease. One of the factors playing a major role. This is the biggest factor that hits home for me. Spotlight on the gut microbiome and menopause, current insights. Why do I have a big red frowny face on there? Well, let me tell you a story. Last year at PLMI, I was in the back of the room with Dr. Jill Carnahan, and Dr. Briggs was about to go on. And Jill and I were talking about her new book, and we were catching up, and we were having a lot of fun. And Dr. Briggs started talking, and she said, the loss of estradiol in menopause is going to wreck your microbiome. It's going to be bad. And Jill and I went, I'll talk to you later. I need to sit down and listen to this. Because we're about the same age. And we were like, dang it, like here it comes. So I was talking with Carrie Krishnan, who is the co-founder of Microbiome Labs. And we were talking about pregnant mothers' guts, the health of their microbiome and gut, and the effect on the developing brain. I am not an OB. You have to be so tall to ride my ride. Like, I don't want pediatrics, maternal, none of that. But he was telling me that he's seen in the literature and a part of when mom's microbiome is really inflamed and infected and messed up, it's going to affect the developing brain of the fetus. And he's seen more and more outcomes when they follow them, developmental autism spectrum, ADHD, mood disorders with the mom's GI tract. And I was like, we get screwed. Like, this isn't fair. And he's like, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, when we go through menopause, it's not like it gets any better. And he goes, oh my gosh. When you go through menopause and lose estradiol, so many things occur, and you're not even aware. You're trying to be good, you're taking your supplements, you're eating healthy. I mean, most of the people in this room are, most of the US are not, but like everyone in here, it doesn't matter. When you lose this estradiol, your inflammatory cytokines go up, your risk for leaky gut goes up, your ability to fight goes down, your immune system completely changes. The way you do or don't make neurotransmitters changes, usually for the worse. You get moody, you gain weight, you can't burn your fatty acids like you could. You become more insulin resistant, all because it can stem back to this loss of estradiol, and as Dr. Briggs talked about in depth about it, but we were focusing on the gut. And I was like, Kieran, I'm 46. And he goes, Carrie, you better get on it. And I was like, Carrie, you better get on it. Like, so we have to be aware, even when we're talking about barriers and we're thinking of chronic disease, autoimmune, cancer, dementia, Alzheimer's, big things, it's gonna be the everyday person in front of you who's like, I'm actually having hot flashes and night sweats. I'm actually going through perimenopause. They may not realize the chronic disease part yet, or the autoimmune disease part yet. They're there because they have brain fog, and they're tired, and they have vaginal dryness, and everything kind of feels like a hot mess. And realize how much this is interconnected. None of this is separate. In fact, it's so interesting is if you've got those patients with ringing in the ear, look at their gut. There's even, we focus so much right here. Oh, you have ringing in the ear? It's right here. There's research to show gut health might play a role in that. And who wouldn't want to get rid of ringing in the ear? Because that's annoying if we could address the gut. And that's it. Obviously, it's not the only reason, but I wanted to put this out there. So what's going on down there? This is going to review for a lot of you. Over 100 trillion microorganisms are in the gut. We have bacteria, fungus, viruses. It makes up just over 50% of the cells in our body. So when you get up in the morning and you say your affirmations to yourself, make sure you say good morning and hello to your microorganisms. Treat them well, treat them kind, because if they band together, they're more than 50% and they revolt, you're in trouble. Like, they will win. Majority rules. So be nice to your microbiome, be nice to the microorganisms in all of your microbiomes. They're winning. In the GI tract, it's thought to weigh about 4.4 pounds. And of course, the gut-brain axis is extremely bidirectional, and it's bidirectional with a lot of different axes, as we've learned all weekend, not just the brain down to the gut up to the brain and back down again, but to all of the systems. It has an impact on your heart and your hormones, your immune system, etc. It's a big deal. They make the neurotransmitters. This one has been talked about so many times with the gut, and the serotonin, and then melatonin, which was Dr. Bland has talked about, and of course Deanna talked about. When you hear people say, well, we know that you make about 80% of your serotonin in the gut, but that may be not necessarily what's going on in your brain. And I'm like, if you've ever been depressed in your brain, you've been depressed in your body. You're not anxious just in your brain, you feel anxiety in your body. It's not it's not segmented, it's all over. So if you have a lot of these GI issues and they're affecting your neurotransmitter production, it's going to be global in the whole body, not just right there in the GI tract. And as Dr. Bland talked about with long COVID, gut. We've got to focus on the gut. Short-chain fatty acids, your indoles, tryptophan, bile acids, choline and metabolites, lactate, vitamins, many of your vitamins, and vitamin K. And what's really interesting to me, I'm on social media quite a bit, and there's a lot of argument from the conventional land on social media that we don't need these supplements, and the liver was born perfectly, and it's a great filter, and we can, it does it on its own. I'm like, until it can't. Or what if genetically it's not? What if the gut is not able to take in the Bs that you are taking in, or make the Bs because the microbiome's a hot mess? Guess what you need for detoxification? A whole bunch of B vitamins. And that's just detoxification. So if they push back on you, it's physiology. I'm like, no, look, it really does play a role, and then it will further play a role with the immune system and up to the brain. So the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve does not get enough attention. It does not get enough love. This morning, I love to take cold showers, assuming my HRV is okay with it. If my HRV drops down, then I know a cold shower is going to make me feel worse, but if I'm good, I'm good. So yesterday morning, I took a cold shower, and I forgot that Seattle water is colder than where I am in Portland. So I just flip it to cold, and I'm standing in the shower. I just flip it to cold because I, go hard or go home. And I squealed, and immediately, when you know too much, I was like, no, start humming. You're going to ruin your vagus nerve. You're going to send sympathetic responses. Start singing, start doing. So there I am in the shower, freezing in the Seattle water, humming, and trying not to wake everybody else around me in the other rooms. Because the vagus nerve really does have that impact. We need an entire lecture on the vagus nerve itself, but by stimulating and improving the vagal tone, it's only going to help our outcomes. And I'm all about free, cheap, and easy. I'm all about that budget-friendly, tactical, practical. And if you can teach your patient something like humming to help improve their vagal tone, or many of the other vagal things, I am all about it, because they're bombarded with so many things every day. And when they're driving, when they're with their kids, when they're at dance competitions, and they're maxed out and they're up to here, you can teach them things to do, and that's what I love about the vagus nerve. So with this is 2015, but I thought it was a nice summary. Increased intestinal permeability has been associated with autoimmune disease such as type 1, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, disease related to chronic inflammation like IBD, asthma, chronic fatigue syndrome, and depression. It has been hypothesized that chronic intestinal hyperpermeability results in pro-inflammatory phenotype induced by enhanced paracellular translocation of microbial, like LPS, and dietary antigens across the gut barrier. Hypothesized back then, we know it now. We know it now, that when you've got that leaky gut, when those tight junctions aren't tight anymore and things are just free-flowing, the immune system gets pissed. It doesn't like that, and it's going to result in a fired-up immune system and can lead to autoimmune and other types of course, chronic disease. So what is the neuroimmune system? Well, it's our brain's immune system. That's its job. It's the neuroimmune system. We have barriers, as we talked about earlier, the blood-brain barrier, blood cerebrospinal fluid barrier, et cetera. There are other barriers. We have our glial cells. Our microglial are the most abundant, the main immune cell. Astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, we have mast cells, and then T and B cells, when they need to, can cross up in there and do their job. And so when it comes to brain defense, we have a non-activated microglial cell. And just like the military or the police, they can be calm and relaxed, and when they need to react, when they need to be activated, they can, and then they can go back to being non-reactive. And we want that. If you get a velociraptor that crosses into your brain, I need you to react, fight it, and then be done and calm back down. But what we're finding is we're getting a lot of this dysfunctional microglia, these chronically activated microglia cells that won't shut down. They're very inflamed and they just keep doing the thing. And now we have these patients with brain on fire. And they come to you and they're really fatigued and they're having a lot of brain issues and symptoms, or they even, potentially dementia and Alzheimer's. And so this is what we're trying to calm down, this brain on fire. So we go from a healthy brain through inflammation into full-on neuroinflammation that doesn't stop, like a fire out of control, and we get all of the symptoms that's occurring. Now remember, when we talk about things like the velociraptors, it can be external stuff, internal stuff, mental stuff, emotional stuff, chemical, environmental, and unfortunately, it can be the act of aging and like the act of going into menopause. So it can happen by things we choose, things we don't choose, and things that are just going to come whether you want it or not. And we have to be aware of this for ourselves to make us healthy practitioners for decades to come and for our patients. So what's considered an actual neuroimmune disorder? MS, lupus, ALS, Guillain-Barré, myasthenia gravis, neuromyelitis optica, encephalomyelitis. Depending on your practice, you may or may not see much of this. What you will see are what's considered neuroimmune related. Now, they have not classified these as disorders yet, but they are related and they may at some point. So all mental health is classified as neuroimmune related. Myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome. Long COVID neuro. I'm pretty sure I meant to write neurological and I got neuro out and got distracted and never came back to it. But I think you know what it means. Dementia, Alzheimer's, menopause symptoms, menopause itself, autism, ADHD, Parkinson's, celiac, and etc. And this, a lot of this is what's walking through your door or making appointments on telehealth, neuroimmune related. This isn't like Vegas. The microbiome keeps no secrets, it tells the brain. And it doesn't have to be through the vagus nerve. Imagine if your microbiome is messed up to the point where your serotonin, your dopamine, right, your GABA, like everything's kind of messed up, your inflammatory cytokines, they're all going systemic and affecting the brain, positively or negatively. They don't keep it to themselves. They don't keep it down there in the gut. They let everybody know. Your gut is like, it's like a reality show, right? It's like one of those gossipy reality shows. It's going to tell everyone. So when you're thinking about neuroimmune related, you want to make sure, as many of the speakers have talked about, that you were going systemic. Like we have to address every single system, but a big base of it is that gut immune. It's a huge base of it. The microbiome of the gut may alter inflammatory signaling inside the brain through the secretion of short-chain fatty acids, controlling the availability of amino acid tryptophan and altering vagal activation. Studies in Korea and elsewhere highlight a strong link between microbiome dynamics and neurocognitive states, including personality. Be kind to your microbiome, y'all, because they might wake up tomorrow and choose bitch. Right? Like, you may wake up tomorrow and be like, why am I so angry? And your microbiome's like, well, I told you. Should have treated me nice last night. Like, that was a terrible meal you had. You've been real under a lot of stress, drinking more than you should have. Like, you had gluten and you know better. Whatever it is. And as a result, your personality changes. I'm going to bring up menopause again. Dr. Briggs talked about menopause. Our personality changes often when we go through perimenopause and menopause. Good or bad, depends how you look at it. Dr. Sheetreat and I were talking about how sometimes for women as we go through perimenopause and we have, zero things to give, like we don't really care anymore, some of that dead weight needs to go. And we're becoming stronger and have clear boundaries, clear barriers, but other times it's because our microbiome is a hot mess and we're inflamed and our microbiome is choosing a personality for us that we would not otherwise prefer to have. So when you think of personality, when somebody comes into you with unhappy with how their personality is, or the people in your life are pointing out to you like, hey, your personality's not been great lately, let's look at a lot of things, but don't forget your microbiome. Be kind to your microbiome. These authors you may recognize, the gut-brain axis, autoimmune and neuroimmune disorders. This was a big one that we discussed in that 6-week boot camp that I was talking about, where Dr. Vojdani talked about we start with the barriers. Because if you don't start with the barriers, then it can kick off this whole domino cascade. And a lot of times we jump right into programs, which I'm not disagreeing with at all, on how to improve the microbiome, but we don't shore up the barriers as well. We don't ever teach our patients about the barriers And I mean, we try, but explaining it is like we're trying to keep the velociraptors out that are outside and then dealing with the velociraptors that we have on the inside. And because we don't want it to progress into autoimmune, neuroimmune, etc. He also talked about this yesterday when it came to like molecular mimicry and the foods you eat and leaky gut. And in this example with aquaporins, I heard him many times talk about this when he lectured about a lot of these foods and the crossover that can happen. And maybe if you haven't shored up your barriers and you haven't worked on some of this stuff, you're gonna need to avoid some foods temporarily because the immune system gets confused and it goes after these foods, and now all of a sudden you have brain issues. And we totally have our patients who've eaten foods like gluten, and they're like, I don't understand. I don't have the GI issue when I eat gluten. I don't have gas or bloating or diarrhea or constipation. Do you get brain fog? Oh my God, yes. I can't remember anything. Do you get anxiety? Oh yeah, for sure. If I have gluten, absolutely I get anxiety. And I don't mean to hate on gluten, but it's a common one. And so it's one where people only micro-focus it on the GI tract, forgetting it's absolutely neuroimmune related. It's systemically related. And then there's LPS. Can't talk about the gut without talking about LPS from your gram-negative bacteria. If LPS crosses the barrier into through leaky gut and out and about, it's wildly inflammatory. Not mildly with an M, wildly with a W. Wildly inflammatory. If they want to induce inflammation in mice or rats or whatnot, like LPS is oftentimes what they use because they will get a huge fire out of it. So if you have this leaky gut and you have these gram-negative bacteria, the LPS is crossing over, the endotoxin, it's a big deal. So we want to shore up the barriers so that you can have it in your gut, but we want to shore up the barriers so it's not crossing over, and then we deal with it in the gut. Lipopolysaccharide-induced neuroinflammation is a bridge to understanding neurodegeneration. Okay, what do we do? This is a lot. Oh my gosh. And it's all day. What's wonderful of going mid-morning on the second day is that the most amazing speakers have gone before me, and I just have to build on them. And it's a lot of the stuff that you've already heard. So this article, Factors Influencing the Blood-Brain Barrier Permeability. It's a very long, very thorough article on all the things that may or may not disrupt negatively your blood-brain barrier. I summed it up for you right here. Everything. Everything influences your blood-brain barrier. If you catch me at lunch or later today and you're like, hey, Carrie does, yes, the answer is yes. Just assume it's yes. It's going to affect the blood-brain barrier. If it's going to affect your gut barrier, your sinus barrier, your skin barrier, because now there's all the literature on leaky skin and aging, leaky skin on disease development. If it's going to affect that, it's going to affect the blood-brain barrier. So we have to be aware and get rid of all the things that are our velociraptors. Now, a lot of foundational work has been discussed today, so I'm not going to reiterate that, but I want to point out this is when I was in Barcelona last month, and we went to a museum that had a Roman village underneath Barcelona, and this is it. This is what it looks like. And their foundation was so clear that you could tell homes, you could tell their sewer system. They had a winery with wine vats. Of course they did. Like, you could see the outline of the city wall. They built their foundations and everything so well and so strong. And when you went through and read the history, parts of this village started in the 1st century. We're in the 21st. In the 1st century. I am not creative at all. I love history more than anything, and I am not creative when I go see historical things. I walk through the whole place and go, this is so old. This is so old, because in the US, old to us is like 100 years, right? You see somebody lives in a 100-year-old house or maybe a 150-year-old house, and you're like, well, that's pretty old. You go to Europe and you're like, so it's built by the Romans. And you're like, got it, old. But we want the same foundation. So when we jump to, here's the supplement, like the one supplement, peptide, hormone, whatever it is to rule them all, and we completely neglect the importance of educating on the foundations, because it's not sexy. Our patients are like, I saw that on Instagram. Like, do I really have to get sunlight in the morning? Do I really have to be off my phone at night? Can't you just give me like theanine or phosphatidylserine? Like, the foundations are the core work, and we build on top of that. And many of the lectures yesterday and today talked about that so much. Take it to heart. All the things everybody's repeating over and over and over each other, write it down on a list, make that educational, and if you're on social media, post the crap out of it, because we need to get that information out there. We also want to remember the GI tract starts in the mouth. So I have really good holistic dentist friends, and they're like, why, at what point do we decide from here is a whole different industry than all of this? At what point do we separate the mouth from everything else? Because your gum health, your tongue health, the microbiome in your oral cavity, if it's bad, guess what? Every time you swallow, you're swallowing that down into your digestive tract, to your stomach, and then your intestines and so forth. And we know we have patients who don't go to the dentist, or they don't floss, or they don't brush, or you're looking at their teeth as you're talking and you're like, ugh, we need to clean that up. Or they've had a long history of mercuries, we learned yesterday, implants, whatever, and it's going to affect their microbiome. The other thing I always want to talk about is Dr. Vojdani talked about the food and molecular mimicry, chewing your food. You are not a snake. Do not open, unhinge, and swallow whole. Chew your food. Break it down into teeny tiny pieces. Help your body out. Help your stomach do its job. Help your intestines do its job. Yes, you're gonna do the foundations, and if a 4-hour program or a 5-hour program or whatever you've got, and your stool testing, absolutely. But at the very least, if you ask somebody, do you eat on the fly? Do you eat while you're working? Do you eat while you're driving? Do you chew your food? Everyone's like, yeah, I do that. So, and it's good for us, remember, too, as practitioners, to slow down and chew your food. And then get your oral health under control. Crossing into and out of the blood-brain barrier requires a lot of ATP. Oh, that's funny. I'm missing that's okay. I had a full battery and a low battery, but I guess I get this battery emoji. So remembering with ATP, as we said, in the mitochondria, you got your cycles, right? Krebs cycle feeds into electron transport chain. We're trying to make ATP for you. This is what's powering you. But if you're busy dealing with velociraptors, you aren't going to be making ATP effectively, and you're going to be run down. Maybe not physically, because we are all type A and organized and practitioners, and we push and we push and we push, and we live on adrenaline and caffeine, some of us more than others. But then when we but the body's like, I'm screaming for help. I don't have the battery source. And remember, your GI tract requires a lot of ATP. And as this article from Dr. Pizzorno, and also you guys, when I was creating my slides, I didn't actually know who the speakers were, even though I've included a lot of the Vojdanis and Dr. Pizzorno, and we've talked about Deanna. So it's just wonderful that everyone's lecturing here and saying the similar things, because it works out really well and goes to show how much of a brilliant mastermind as Dr. Bland is to pull everybody together, knowing you'd probably say these things. But let's talk about ATP. ATP cannot be stored. The average cell uses 10 billion with a B, ATP per day. This represents about 4.25 watts, the equivalent of energy in a AA battery. Every day, a healthy person produces a remarkable 1,200 watts. If any of you have been in a low watt room, if any of you happen to be, like last night, we had the most amazing dinner, steak dinner, in a great steakhouse for the speaker dinner, and it was about 6 watts in the steakhouse. And I was like, am I old? I can't see the menu. Get my phone out. Am I that person? Am I my mom? If I just turn my phone, the flashlight on my phone to see. But imagine running on 6 watts all the time as opposed to 1,200 watts. It's a big difference. In your house at night when you want to wind down, absolutely, you want to get the wattage down. In the day, under these lights, when you're moving about, when you want to see, you want brighter watts. When you're outside, you want the sun out, not the gray of Seattle. It's the same in your body. Are you running on 6 watts or are you running on 1,200 watts? So supporting the mitochondria, but we got to shore up the barriers, get rid of the velociraptors, and then help the mitochondria go back to what they're doing. Stress. Stress can come in all sides. Dr. Briggs talked about it at length, so I'm not going to go into it, but I love stress, depression, diet, and the gut microbiota. Human-bacteria interactions at the core of psychoneuroimmunology and nutrition. And when it comes to stress, obviously stress can be physical, stress can be chemical, it can be environmental, but also that mental and emotional aspect of stress. And supporting that. There are a lot of ways. There are very cool people in this room who are working to help us with that aspect of stress, and take it seriously. Yes, I love ashwagandha. Sure, rhodiola is fantastic, but it surely is not going to eliminate the mental and emotional stress that I have in my life. I still have to do that work. I still have to figure that out. And it's the same for our patients and clients as well. Now, when it comes to the rest of the barriers, hold on. Okay, good. Just want to make sure that slide's in there. When it comes to the rest of the barriers, we're going full circle back to the beginning of, like, what can we control when it comes to the barriers and what can't we control? We can, when we're educating, oftentimes with our patients, depending on how much time you have, but like the why is really important. When you're trying to explain to them, like, look, I'm trying to keep the velociraptors out, and the ones you have in your body I'm trying to deal with. And it's the same in the habits they choose. And then how do we negate, improve upon, minimize the habits or the exposures they can't? Like, we're just trying to do the best we can, but all of this adds up, as we know, in like the bucket analogy, and your bucket suddenly overfloweth. And as I was talking with an attendee yesterday, another doctor yesterday, I said, look, your bucket was almost right to the surface. I know you. And then you got into perimenopause, and it overflowed. And that's what's going on in that particular instance. And so to just remember these things when people are like, I haven't changed anything, like, that you know of, it absolutely could be happening internal, or you think you're not as stressed as you are, because in our society we are trained, chin up, we can handle this, push through. I'm a type A person, firstborn, I can do this. Totally talking about myself. Loneliness, this is the last, there's two more things, this and then one other thing, and then I'm gonna wrap up. Loneliness. This is an article in part written by Dr. Molly Maloof. She wrote The Spark Factor, Loneliness or Perceived Social Isolation. Loneliness contributes to the etiology of these conditions by acting as a chronic stressor that leads to neuroendocrine dysregulation and downstream immunometabolic consequences that manifest in disease, ultimately cause mitochondrial dysfunction, which is implicated in mental and metabolic disease. How many of you ask your patients, are you lonely? And how many of your patients say, oh no, I'm married with kids? It's not what I asked. What I asked was, are you lonely? Because that elicits an entirely different response. We know people who've been married 30 years and feel lonely in their relationship. They're lonely in their community, they were lonely through COVID, they're lonely in their families, and loneliness plays a big role. Many of you here are introverts. One of the big things I love coming to PLMI is that it's, my husband's like, you're just going for your friends, aren't you? I'm like, yeah, 100%. Because it's such a great group of people. Everyone is kind, everyone is talkative, everyone introduces themselves in my experience. And that is 100% because Dr. Bland sets it up that way. Because Dr. Bland himself is the absolute originator of kind community. And so if you are in here today and you're like, I don't know, I'm kind of an introvert, I'm not sure, I haven't really met anybody, you come find me. I will be your best friend by the end of the conference, and I'll have introduced you to everybody, because loneliness isn't worth it, not even in a conference. And loneliness and alone are different. Dr. Elroy and I were talking yesterday about coming to conferences, and it's really nice to have the whole hotel room to yourself. Like my family, my dog, like I get the whole bed to myself, nobody wakes me up, nobody's snoring, like nothing. I love my alone time when I come to conferences at the end of the day. But loneliness is different than I love my alone time. So check in with your patients on their loneliness factor. And the very last thing, as it relates to gut-brain, is head trauma. I don't feel like head trauma is discussed enough. And because not a lot of people understand how to do head trauma, it gets blown off. Neuroinflammation following traumatic brain injury, take it seriously or not. Hint, take it seriously. Because head trauma will hit you in your weakest place. And I don't mean the head, but if gut health is your weakest point, it will make that significantly worse. I've had a lot of head trauma people over the years who, of course, have a lot of GI issues. And they're like, I don't understand. I hit my head. I'm like, they're best friends. Nothing stays in the gut, it goes back and forth, it's bidirectional. You need to get this evaluated. And many people blow off head trauma because they didn't get a massive blow to the head. They didn't have like football level injuries, but they had chronic, low, repeated, or something they forgot about. They slipped and fell, and then realized like, man, I was never well since I slipped on the ice that one time and hit my head. Or I was never well from when my kid bonked me in the head really hard, but like 3 times in the same month. So get them evaluated if they're noticing those patterns. All right, in summary, as Dr. Vojdani said, from his lips to mine to yours, start with the barriers. Start with the barriers, work on that foundational health, be like the Romans, build really strong walls to keep out the bad things and in the good things. Avoid or eliminate velociraptors, obviously. But I know some of you, I'm not gonna lie, some of you are crazy enough to try to tame and bring it home. Some of you would see a velociraptor and text your significant other, babe, I know you said no more animals, but there's this velociraptor in Seattle. No, we don't do velociraptors. You're gonna remember that the microbiome and the brain talk a lot. It doesn't just stay in the microbiome, but it often can start in the microbiome. So start there. If you're feeling overwhelmed in the barriers, start with the microbiome barrier, leaky or not. And always healing happens at joy. I talked about loneliness, I talked about community. Joy in general has been mentioned a few times. It is my favorite phrase, that healing happens at joy. So find your joy and find your joy in others. Thank you.